Welcome, everyone. I'm Joe Galvin, Chief Research Officer at Vistage Worldwide. It's my pleasure to host the latest webinar in our Peak Performer webinar series. This series is designed to support your leadership climb by bringing the most trusted experts to the Vistage community. Experts who provide exceptional insight and best practices, helping you navigate new challenges and possibilities. Today, we focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. DE&I have become increasingly important for CEOs, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's become a requirement to compete for and retain talent in the workforce. In our Q4 2021 survey, 67% identified DE&I as important to attracting and retaining talent. We're joined today by Alisa Sangster, CEO of Forte Foundation, and Amy Orloff, Director of Professional Programs. Forte Foundation's mission is to launch women into fulfilling, significant careers through access to business education, professional development, and a community of successful women. Alisa's extensive knowledge of issues affecting women's abilities to seek, prepare for, and attain business leadership positions. She serves on the Women Initiative Council of the Certified Financial Planner Board of Standards. She's also frequently interviewed for stories on women advancements in business and finance outlets, including Fortune, Forbes, Bloomberg, Business Week, New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, and The Economist, and has penned opinion pieces for many news organizations. Amy is focused on finding new ways to leverage and extend Forte's programming to support both professional women and the organizations in which they operate. Amy is also co-author and architect of Forte's Allies for Gender Equity Initiatives, which offer men a framework to be stronger allies in gender equity. Welcome, Alisa and Amy. We are anxious to learn from you today.
Thanks for having us. I'm going to turn it over to you, Alyssa, but I know we have a lot of slides to get through, so.
Yeah. Well, and thanks. I all of a sudden realized no mute. I hadn't unmuted myself. So welcome, everybody. We're excited to chat with you today and tell you more about our journey with gender equity. And Amy is my co-pilot here today and has a lot of really great knowledge to share with you. I will start off by just saying, you know, this gender equity title is something that's relatively new to us too, because it started out as kind of men as allies, and we really moved it into gender equity for, allies for gender equity, just because we know that men are involved, but women are also involved in this in many different ways, given that all women aren't the same, and there's lots of opportunities for you to also be an ally to other women. So a little bit about Amy and I mean, I'm in the Vistage group. I just want everybody to know that I'm not only the CEO of Forte, but I'm also a member of Vistage and a Vistage group here in San Antonio, where Tom Cuthbert is my chair. So I wanted to share that with you. And Forte is an organization, a nonprofit that is around 35 employees, and we've been around for about 20 years, and we're a virtual organization. So even though I sit in San Antonio, the organization is virtual all over the United States, different cities and different states. So we wanted to kick things off today by just saying, this is kind of where Forte started back in 2001. There was a study that was done around women in MBA programs and what was holding women back from being in an MBA program, and then also in business leadership and representing there. And so a catalyst study was done, MBA, the gateway, or women in the MBA, gateway to opportunity. And the things that came out of that study, which is quite exhaustive, so these are just 4 highlights of a very long research report, but that women reported that business careers didn't align with their values. So what they were thinking they wanted to do, they didn't see that business had opportunities for that. They weren't sure that they had the right skill set for business. They didn't see women in their organizations having satisfying careers. They were like, why do I want to be a leader in business? They don't seem to be enjoying it all that much. And then when they thought about going to business school, they really didn't know anyone who had gone, and they didn't have a manager telling them you would be a great fit for an MBA program. They didn't have peers or family. Their influencer circle really wasn't encouraging them toward business school. So that led us to build an organization that could address many of those topics. Some of those things that I mentioned on the earlier slide are misperceptions, or they are reflective of not knowing the whole story. And so we really wanted to fill in the gaps of what women knew about business careers, business school, business leadership. So we brought together the companies who employ those women, the business schools who would educate them, and really tried to build an organization that would be centered around education, connections, and community, and would give them this pathway and access that they needed in order to be successful in business careers. So we're kind of a consortium of companies and schools. This is a great list of a sampling of our partner companies. You can see these are household names. These are people that you would recognize. And these are we often work with their campus recruiting groups or their professional recruiting groups, their diversity, equity, and inclusion leads, but that's who our engagement is primarily with these companies. We also work with the top MBA programs. So if you look around the country and you pick kind of the most prestigious MBA company that's MBA school that's in your geographic area, probably Forte partners with them. But this is just, again, a sample of our 55, 56 business school partners that we actually work with.
Now I muted myself.
Now you're muted. Go for it, Amy.
Yeah, sorry. Well, I'm going to pass it back on to you quickly, Alyssa. But the first question we always get in the ally space, and Joe, you tried to do a great job in talking about the business case for diversity, but we always get the why. Like, why is this necessary? And because Alyssa has really been with us since the inception, I wanted you to kind of start with our story, but then help others to see kind of the business case for diversity, if that's okay.
Sure. And I'll start with kind of where we were, because I mentioned, you know, that those 4 kind of top level findings from the research study. The reason we even began this journey was looking at women's enrollments in MBA programs. And you can see in the 2001 column there, the magenta colored bar is they were less than 30%. So you can see a large portion of our partner schools were not reflecting equity or parity in their MBA programs. And so what we wanted to do was say, and my background is in MBA programs, and Amy's is too. I worked at UT Austin and Amy worked at Wharton at University of Pennsylvania. And both of us have seen this, you know, this is evident of what we were dealing with back in 2001 in our business schools. You would be putting together teams for your entering MBA program, and you would be worried about, do we have enough women to go around for every team of 5 so that each team has 1 woman? And then you would say, oh, well, is it fair to just give every woman 1 woman in their team? That should we load them all up and have teams with 2 women? And you know, it was just a mathematical challenge for us to make it happen. And you know that those women felt like onlys all the time. And so our goal in business school was just to get to parity so that you could have 40 to 50% women enrolled, so that when you looked around a classroom, you didn't notice there's no women in this classroom. So we've made significant progress. That's the point of this slide, that you can see that magenta tab has really shrunk down.
Sorry, I was sorry, Alyssa, because we've made progress, but I'm not sure that the world has. So I kind of jumped ahead.
Yeah, thanks. And here's the slide kind of representing that. You can see, and I will tell you, some of these numbers look a lot better than they did even 5 years ago. So we have made progress, but these numbers were so low that even progress doesn't really look like something to celebrate. CEOs, 6.2%. I think that's up from probably what has been somewhat stagnant, about 4.5%. The gender pay gap, again, if you will drill down in that a little bit later, but 16%. S&P 500 board seats, we've seen huge improvement there. So 28% is a good solid number. There's still more that needs to be done there. And then venture capital funding, again, not giving the women the capital they need to start these new businesses. So the pay gap, again, this breaks it down, I think, a little bit more specifically by women of color, and it shows you for each of those groups, overall about 82 cents in this statistic. So it's a little bit different than the previous one. But when you look at the breakdown between Asian women, Black women, Native American women, and Latina women, you see that if you did this on a timeline and you showed compared to their the men overall, how long they would have to work into the next year in order to be making the same amount of money as their male counterparts. So again, just a little data point. There's all kinds of different ways you can slice and dice this.
And Alyssa, I just wanted to point out the other one was more current. This is from 2020. I just really like the visual, so wanted to
the
show
visual's
it.
great. So yeah, just take it for what it's worth. So we're always interchanging our examples, but the other great one, and we'll talk more about McKinsey, is this is an annual report that McKinsey does, Women in the Workplace, and this is from the 2020 study, looking at about 317 companies across Canada and the US. And you can see that it's broken down so nicely with, you know, the white men, men of color, white women, women of color, and it shows you this funnel. So entry level, what happens from entry level into the manager position, senior manager, VP, SVP, C-suite, and they update this annually to see if we have seen progress. But what you look at, if you see the white men tab at the top, 35% entering, and then at the C-suite it's 66%. Take that down to women of color, where you see 18% entering, and you see about 3% in that C-suite. So you can, I'm not going to go through all the data points here, but you can see the general trend is, you know, it's going to shrink anyway because everybody doesn't get into the C-suite. But when you look at that overall representation of the C-suite, you can see how the breakdown has shifted and changed based on the different categories. So the next thing here that comes out of the McKinsey in the Workplace, this is the 2021 survey, is really looking at the promotion level. And that's the broken rung is one of those things that McKinsey talks about a lot and has been kind of entered the vernacular, I would say, in terms of DEI, which is if 100 men go into, or if a group of employees is looked at, for every 100 men who were promoted to that first level manager, so this is your first promotion after your university, about 86 women overall are promoted. 89 of them, or 89 white women are promoted, and 85 women of color are promoted. So you can see immediately, this is within 1 to 3 years of leaving university, the gap is beginning to widen, and it never improves. It gets bigger, and it's hard to reverse.
Yeah, and Alyssa, the reason I included not just for this is the more current data, but we got a great question pre-webinar, right? Someone said, what about women who opt out, right? There's been some research about women who don't want to pursue high level positions. Well, this is one of the things that they're facing, right? They're working just as hard, and they're seeing men get promoted at higher levels. But there's some other points too that happen. So I'll let you take over.
That really shows that immediately they go out, they start their first job, and they see the men around them get promoted faster than they do. And so you sense like, was I just not good enough? Or was it truly that I was overlooked? Did my manager not advocate for me in conversations where promotions were happening? And so that leads us to this slide where you look at some snapshots, some of this during the pandemic. I think employees with women managers are more likely to say that their manager has supported and helped them over the past year. So you look at these gaps here, and whether by choice or by necessity, the women are clearly providing more support, checking in with their employees about well-being, making sure their workload was manageable, helping them navigate their own work-life challenges, and preventing or managing burnout on behalf of their employees. So again, a little extra workload added on top of their current responsibilities
that they're not being recognized for.
Exactly. So are they getting those promotions and the recognition and the pay? All of that then contributes to the next slide as well, which is looking at senior leaders and managers and where they're reporting burnout, stress, exhaustion. All of that is here, and you can see that the burnout is very high. And when you look at senior leaders and managers compared to overall, it's even more so the case. So again, for women, you are seeing substantially more burnout, stress, exhaustion, and then extra workload in the slide before that. And so I think that to that question, before we assume that women are opting out, I think looking at some of these structural challenges that they're experiencing, working harder,
Absolutely.
working, you know, and feeling like they're never getting ahead or they're never being recognized for all that work. And I hear anecdotally from many women that they do feel like they have to put in extra effort, more work to be recognized similarly to their male counterparts. And, you know, we could do a whole webinar probably on what are those characteristics. That's not what we're really here to talk about today, but we did want to address that conversation that came up. So I'll pass it to Amy to kind of start digging in a little more on the case for diversity before we get to the allyship.
Yeah, so in case it wasn't clear from these past slides, right? The environment is tough for women in the workplace still. They are working hard, sometimes more than their fair share, and not getting recognized in the same degree, either compensation wise or promotion wise, right? So, and yet people still ask, well, is there a business case for diversity? You know, so why do we care? Why do we care? We care because not only, as Joe pointed out before, are companies recognizing the need for this, the need for different ways of thinking, the need for diversity of thought and personnel, so that their customers can better, better recognize themselves in the employees. They're more profitable. Let's be honest, study after study has shown that more diverse companies are more profitable, right? In 2019, if a company was gender diverse, they were 25% above the median. If they were ethnically diverse, they were 36% above the median, right? Better profits. And then recruiting. Joe, you talked about recruiting, and this speaks to exactly your point, right? It's important for millennials, and think about it, millennials are slightly older now. These are employees in their 30s or so. They want to work for inclusive companies. They're not going to come to your companies if they're not diverse. And that does mean inclusion in all aspects, but including gender. So that's something to keep in mind. So if we can agree that there is a business case for diversity, right? Well, how do we get there? I think we're going to get there in a minute, but first, I think I want to ask you a question. So Kristen, can I ask you to share a poll with everybody? If you identify as a man, and I've actually changed this, so if you identify as a man or a woman, I want you to share your thoughts on gender equity in your workplace. Kristen, put a poll up, and I'm going to ask you all to vote. One choice. And Kristen, I'm going to trust you to know when the polls are coming in, but some people might think gender equity isn't really a problem for men at their company. Some people think that the efforts are not needed. Some might think it's a problem, but not a problem for men to solve, right? And some might say, yeah, I get it. I just don't know what to do about it. And our goal by the end of today's workshop is to get you all to the point where you can see instances of gender inequity and you can do something about it. So Kristen, do you have the results? Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting and not surprising. Alyssa, we did this research just with men, granted. We did this research just with men. So I'm going to ask you to walk through the research that we did in, I think it was 2017.
Sure. So our poll will be a little skewed because we have both men and women on our are in attendance today. So, but what we wanted to show you is a grid that we have in a lot of our Ally workshop materials. And this is really men's response to gender equity in the workplace. And it starts really in this kind of first square, which says, this group of men in this green square, it says it's a problem for men. And that really means that their view is that women's successes are reducing opportunities for them, that this is kind of a, women are receiving special treatment, and they see diversity really as a zero-sum game. And so that's kind of the first category. Then there's the next one up that says it's really not a problem. Many men don't see diversity as an issue. They see women in leadership roles in their company and in their organization and in their industry maybe, or maybe even the world at large. And so they don't appreciate really that most organizations and industries, women's representation really does decline as they step up into these leadership positions.
Hey, Alyssa, can I just jump in there and talk about
Yes.
perception bias? Because there was a really great study that talked about the fact that if you have 100 employees in a room and there are 10 women and 90 men, the men will look around and think that women are equally represented. So just wanted to point out there's perception bias within this category.
Right. And that's okay. We get it. It's just the fact of the way you look around and you see women and you think, hey, they're here. So clearly we don't have a problem with that. And then the next step up is really saying, well, yes, maybe there's a problem, but it's not my problem to deal with. So I realize that gender probably does play some role, but they don't really see this as their role. We have human resources in place. We have other things, initiatives that are taking place, and they personally don't discriminate. So it's not their problem. They're not responsible for kind of taking the lead organizationally and making change happen. And whether or not they don't personally discriminate, that's up for debate. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But their perception is that they are not a part of the problem. So then the next one up is really kind of where I think this group mostly is, and it's the, you see a problem, you're just not quite sure how to respond. We haven't always had the language, we haven't known exactly what to call the problem, we haven't given suggestions on how to maybe improve on the challenges that you're seeing in gender diversity. And then the final thing is what Amy said, you see a problem and you're able to respond to it. So this is really on the highly supportive end of the spectrum. There are men who absolutely know what to do. They've been in this situation, they're comfortable, they've exercised that muscle, and they know how to make change happen. Some of them may have gone through some kind of training that really just helps them put, get their head around all of the things that they can do to make that happen. Maybe some of them have grown up in an organization, a family, experience, whatever it is, they know kind of how to operate in this place. And what we're trying to do at Forte is to really just provide the education, the information, the curriculum to help move everyone through this process so that everybody becomes more comfortable with how to respond and what to do in order to respond.
Yeah. So it's great to see this. Well, what does this look like in action? How does this affect women in the workplace? Well, we decided we're going to quiz you and see how your knowledge is on this topic. So in the chat, I'm going to ask you true or false. About 30% of women report they are often the only woman or one of the only women in the room at work. So I'm going to check the chat. I see there's already such stuff happening in the chat, but I'm curious. I know there were some audio issues just before. Thank you, Dick, for pointing that out for us. But true or false? About 30% of women report they are often the only woman or one of the only women at the room. True. Shelby, thank you for being the first up. True. A lot of truths.
There's some in the Q&A as well, Amy. Just
so there's some in the Q&A. Great. Awesome. A lot of false. Matthew, I think you win. This is actually false, but it was kind of a trick question because it's 20 and 40. So if we want to average it, it is 20% of women. It's only 20, it's not 30. 20% still not great, right? Say they're often the only women in the room. But 40% of senior women say the same exact thing, right? Women definitely have that experience of being the only. And what does it mean to be the only? Look at some of the feelings that they've identified. under pressure to perform, on guard, left out, some fortunate to be there, okay, but that your actions reflect on people like you. When Alyssa speaks, is she speaking for all women or is she speaking for herself, right? Closely watched. Let's do another one. Middle managers have less opportunity to influence gender equity and diversity than senior leaders. True or false? Dick, you said you don't see the poll. It's actually, you're just supposed to put true or false in the chat. Matthew's sticking with false. Laura's going with false. Shelby's going with false. We got some trues. Middle management influence? False. Why? Because they do have the ability to shape it. Middle managers, more so than the C-suite, have been shown to influence people's satisfaction at work. Have you ever heard the expression, people don't leave companies, they leave people? It was coined by Claudio Aros Fernandez, and he was at one of the headhunting firms. I can't remember which one when he coined the term. But if your manager doesn't perceive your hopes, if you're not seeing yourself fitting into your manager's idea of success, it's a ticket for you out, right? So middle managers have a lot of influence to play here. And finally, okay, how does this manifest itself in the workplace? Research studies show that men interrupt women more than twice within a 3-minute conversation. True or false? A lot of truths jumping up there right away. I love that. Yeah, it's true. It's true. Have you heard of manterruption? Manterruption is when you're in the middle of a meeting and you are cut off, a woman is cut off by a man. This is a close counterpart to bropriation, where your idea is presented by a man several minutes later and accepted as the definitive idea, even though you've done it. So manterruption, bropriation, these are all terms that are starting to catch on. Why? Because this is such a common phenomenon. Okay.
Yeah,
that's
Amy,
great.
I was just going to add, I mean, I see we have some disagreement, and I think, we're out here trying to give kind of general thoughts about what's happening in the workplace. And I don't think it applies to every single person and in every single in every single situation. But I think that there's enough evidence from, companies and research and women that this does happen, and it does happen quite a bit. And but it doesn't mean that it's always the problem and it's always the thing
correct.
we look to. But I think it's just important to point out that we're trying to give you a broad spectrum of concerns that might come up as you're dealing with gender equity in the workplace. So
absolutely. So what do you do about this, right? How can those who identify as men or those who identify as women support others who identify as women in the workplace? There's typically 3 ways that always jump to mind, right? But the first 2 are much more common: mentorship and sponsorship. The last one is allyship. So why are mentorship and sponsorship so much easier to grasp a hold of? Anyone want to put in the chat? I'd like to be interactive. Anyone want to put in the chat a definition of mentorship? I'm going to give everyone a few minutes. No takers? What about sponsorship? No takers? Well, here you go. Very common definition. Guidance. Love that, Laura. Thank you. Mentorship is often referred to as giving career support when you're in the room together. Sponsorship, right, is giving that same support when the person's not in the room, right? So mentorship and sponsorship are components of allyship, right? Being able to be that coach, to provide that guidance. Thank you for all of those definitions, right? Being able to give that career advice, to help people on the career path, whether it is advising them face-to-face or promoting them when they're not in the room, right? Talking about what a great job they did. So, but the problem is, while you might have a visual in mind when it comes to mentorship and sponsorship, when I ask people for their definition of allyship, not even going to ask you to put it in, I get all over the place. For some people, it's like crying sexism in a meeting, standing up. For some people, it's marching and taking part in a march. For others, it is just that mentorship and sponsorship, right? Allyship is hard because it's all of those things. And that's the problem is the definition, supportive association with another underrepresented person or group to which one does not belong. What does a supportive association look like? That is the key. People, all of us are action oriented, right? We want the checklist. We want to know, what do I do? How can I be a better ally? Just tell me what to do and I'm going to do it. I don't think anybody says, I don't want to be an ally. I don't want to be an ally because it's the wrong thing to do. I think they're saying, and you said this, 67% of you said it. I just don't know what that looks like. What does it mean? It'd be great if there was a checklist, but there's not. So what Forte did is Forte said, okay, we're not going to be able to give you a checklist. We're not going to be able to give you the exact vocabulary to use. We're not going to be able to give you all of the exact behaviors to enact. But what we can do is give you a framework to start thinking about your actions. And that's the how of allyship. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, with the framework, allies, whether it's an ally for gender equity or it's an ally for any other underrepresented population, really have these three things in common. They're learners. They really want to understand the population that they're trying to support. They do that by reading, by listening, but also by reaching out. They really want to get to know. The thing about allyship is it's not only relational, it's centered on the other person. And until you know the other person's experience, until you've reached out to really understand the other person's experience, it's hard to be an ally to that person. And so how do you reach out? How do you learn? You pay attention. You become more aware of not just your own activities, but the activities of those around you. That's great. It's very easy for us to say all of this, but what does that look like in practice? My guess is that all of you want some more practical tips. So that's what Alyssa and I came armed with. Alyssa, before I dive into the learn, anything you want to add to this?
No, I think that was
Okay.
great.
Okay, great. So what does learning look like? All right. How many of you have heard of the broadsheet? Right? Fortune has the broadsheet. You can subscribe to this and every day you get a little newsletter in your inbox. Alyssa and I read it. It takes what, 2 minutes to skim, Alyssa, if that. It just starts to show you what the state of women at work is like. What's it like there? So again, Dick, I'm not arguing with you when you said you didn't agree that that's the current state, and Alyssa said, because it might not be your experience. But if you want to start seeing what the experience of all women is, you might want to just subscribe to the broadsheet and check in every once in a while. We already talked about women in the workplace. This is an annual study by McKinsey, online, published online every year. Great data. Big swath of companies. It just gives you insight into the current state, right? So this last one was really focused on what happened during COVID. Great, great, great annual report that you can check in with every year just to see what's the current state of women in the workplace. Here's a TED Talk. For those of you that want to follow up with us, we can send you this. I think we could send you this deck, or I think Kristen said we can post this deck, and the links are right in here. Gabriella Schuster is someone who Alyssa and I work with on a committee in kind of a different aspect of our organization. But she has a great TED Talk on allyship. And maybe you're not a reader. Tune in to Gabriella's talk and just kind of introduce yourself to the concept a little bit more deeply. There is a book that I strongly recommend you read, Good Guys, How Men Can Be Better Allies for Women in the Workplace. Alyssa, I'm not just strongly recommending that because you and I were both interviewed for that book, although I have to say we were. And Dave and Brad have been good friends to Forte. Their first book, Athena Rising, was all about how to be a better mentor to women at work. And then when they saw all of the confusion around allyship, they went into that area as well. How else can you learn? Participate in discussions. Understand the challenges that women are facing. It's not going to be possible for you to be an observer only and get a full sense of what's going on. Participate in the discussions. And that's leaning in towards reaching out. So Alyssa, I'm gonna move to reaching out and give you the mic.
That's great, thanks. So I think, you know, we wanted to give you, as Amy said, some really tactical things that you could do. And we have a couple of examples of training and other things that are very helpful, because there is a lot of this journey is about the self-reflection and really activating some of these things that you might be approaching more passively right now. And we don't think that everybody needs to start thinking about this 24/7 and doing only male ally activity. But I think if you sprinkle it in with your regular activities and you really just start flexing that muscle a little bit around thinking about this topic, you'll see that there are a lot of easy ways just to integrate these kind of activities into your daily managerial leadership style. So one thing we gave a link here, and this will be in the deck so that you can grab it off of the Vistage website, but reading and doing the activity, starting your male ally journey, that's something that's in our materials, and it's something that's easy for you to get access to. The other thing is around ERGs. You know, does your company have an ERG? You can, and that's an employee resource group, and you may have these for different people within your organization. You may not be big enough to have an ERG, and that's also, you know, obviously you don't need to have two people meeting all the time, but maybe those two people want to get together and talk about what the challenges is. Yeah, so employee resource group, and it's really just a committee or a group that in organizations that gets together and talks about what are the challenges we're facing in the industry, in the organization. What are things we could do for these employees that could better support their journey through our company? Many of the firms around that we work with have an ERG. An employee affinity group is another name that you might see it called. But sometimes even in an industry or even in a geographic area, if you are a member of a tech community or a manufacturing community within a certain geographic area, and women or underrepresented employees want to get together with their peers in those other organizations to talk about what those challenges are, that's a way to give those employees support. Sometimes companies fund these activities and give these groups a budget. You definitely want to have some kind of goal for the ERG. Sometimes the goal is business aligned, and they're looking at how can we improve the number of women who are our clients. A lot of the financial firms are very interested in using those ERGs for business purposes, but mostly they are used to support the group, the group of employees, and giving them a better experience at work. Another question you can ask is, you know, does your women's ERG or affinity group have an event that you could attend? So this kind of goes across all of the diversity categories. One thing we learned from our MBA students when they started Men as Allies chapters on their campuses and in their MBA program, they started to realize as they went through this journey that, wow, there's a lot of students that come to our US MBA program who live in other countries, and this is a huge step for them. It's not a comfortable step. They have to come here and speak a different language. They have to acclimate to the culture, and they have to be in school learning with a group of people they've never met before. So that's a group that's kind of outside of their comfort zone. How can we connect with them, reach out to them, and provide a better experience for them? So their male allyship training opened their eyes to all the different other groups that might be coming and showing up in a more uncomfortable state than they were because they're back at their alma mater from undergrad, they're living in the same city, whatever it is, they're still in the United States speaking their first language. There were a lot of things that they understood now about how to be sensitive to the journeys of other people and how they could be supportive. So I digress, but come back to maybe there's an event you can attend just to be supportive, to learn more. It's all about the learning and the journey. Nobody expects that you're going to show up and solve a problem, but that you might understand better what the challenges are if you hear it personally from the women in those ERGs. And I would say to the women on the call, inviting them in to do just that and giving them a safe place to join your event and to explain that we want you here and we want you being a part of this conversation, that goes just a long, long way to building that goodwill and that support, because ultimately you just want them to participate. And that's where we were long ago when we started this journey. And then finally, we talked about mentorship and sponsorship, but just looking around and thinking, are we only mentoring or is there a sponsorship role here? Are we actually assigning sponsors to our early career employees? And are we giving someone with power the ability to speak authentically and knowledgeably about someone earlier in their career journey and say, I think this young woman, this young man, this whatever it is, has what it takes to do this project, and to be able to speak with authority to your team, to your other leaders in the organization about what you know about this person. That requires knowledge of that employee, a relationship with that employee, enough to understand about who you're putting your stamp of approval on. But a formal program like that is monitored and you're making sure that that's happening across the board for all employees, not just informally where things are comfortable and make sense for the leader to take someone to lunch, to play golf, whatever it is. Make sure that's happening more formally, and that there's someone really thinking about how you monitor and track all of those things. So I think from there, we'll go into our next slide, which is really around the pay attention. And there's a few tips here about how you can do that. And so first, when you look at the projects that you are implementing every year within your organization, and who is getting assigned to kind of those high value projects, those high visibility projects, are you making sure that everyone's been given the same opportunity, that you're not making assumptions or false assumptions about whether someone is ready for that, interested in doing that, wants to do it? What is it that you want to make sure you're calculating all of those things into the decision, but make sure that you are looking at it and that you're tracking it. And you're saying, okay, this year we had 10 women, last year we had 8 women. So we've been better distributing the women into these high projects. And how does that all break out within your organization? Again, if you're small, maybe it's a little more difficult to come up with these numbers, but paying attention to it and even asking the question, I think, goes a long way. I mentioned measuring and tracking. I think any goals that are set that are related to pay or employee satisfaction or advancement within the organization, being able to look at that data every year, not every month or every week, but just annually going back and saying, did this work out fairly across our organization? Did we ask the right questions to make sure that there wasn't bias somewhere within the decision-making process? And I think that's what we really want to, the kind of questions you want to ask about these kind of key critical questions that are related to advancement within your organization. And then the last recommendation is really, are you adequately training and preparing your managers? Amy mentioned how important managers are in the overall satisfaction of your employee base, and that they can be the reason somebody walks away from your organization. And unbeknownst to you, you recruited a top talent off of a college campus and they came in and worked for 5 years. And then that second assignment or third assignment, they got a manager that just wasn't doing what your organization values and thinks is important. And that person, your highly talented recruit, walks because that manager was not trained appropriately. It was not, the things that your organization valued and wanted to promote were not valued and promoted by that manager. So really paying attention to how you prep them, to be the leaders and the managers you want them to be, and to also be the advocates for their teams and for their individual employees, and sometimes holding them accountable. It might be that you set goals for the managers, like, we want to see this happen in your team and within your organization, and we're watching that, and we're going to tie that to your compensation because we think that's so important. Again, it's all a talent game, and these are just some suggestions about how you can go about being more effective just by paying attention to some of the data.
Yeah. So, Alyssa, we just really skimmed the surface. There's so much more information we can give you. I know that we want to leave enough time for questions and answers before we move on to that, or start typing them in to the Q&A while I'm saying the next few points. But we dive so much deeper in some of our other programs that we do, that once again, we were just trying to give you a taste. But just to let you know, it's such a complex issue that we actually created a full curriculum around the topic. It's a 10-part program. It dives not only into gender equity, but really into the intersectionality of women. You saw a lot of our data talks not just about women, but around women of color, right? Because for every problem that a white woman has, chances are a woman of color has it, maybe not twice, but has it a little bit worse, right? Whether it's the pay gap, whether or not it's the promotion rate. So we have a 10-part curriculum that a lot of companies, TD Bank, Amazon, I'm just trying to think of some of Kaiser Permanente, a lot of companies have started using this curriculum that we deliver. We also have a training program, right? Because not every company has really said, well, we want to roll this out among everyone. So we do our own inclusive leadership training where we really dive deep into these topics and we bring in experts. I mentioned Dave and Brad before. They give a keynote. Julie Kratz is the author of several books on allyship. She partners with Erica Young, and they do the deep dive into intersectionality together. And then my colleague, Scott, and I do some of the training as well. So we also have this program, which is for individuals. Wanted to mention that, but I know that we're happy to take questions at this point.
Listen, Amy, thank you so much. That was very informative and eye-opening for me, especially. We had a question that was submitted in advance, so I want to cover that first, and then I could literally ask you guys questions for the rest of the afternoon. But let's take this question first, and then we'll go. Here's the question. A significant body of research that a lot of folks can relate to at a personal level is that women don't always want the leadership roles. The perceived stress and responsibilities down with the extra pay, they divert financial responsibility to their spouse, etc. There have been a lot of articles printed like this over the years that seems to be unaddressed. What are your thoughts on that concept and just some commentary, please?
Yeah, I'm going to dive in here because that's Alyssa and I were trying to share the McKinsey data from this past year study to show you that, yes, there have been studies that show that women are opting out and that they're facing this burnout and they don't want to advance, but they're also operating in structures that aren't recognizing their talent. They're fighting an uphill battle. It's Sisyphus every day, rolling the rock up the hill. So for every study that shows that women don't want to advance, there's a corollary study which shows that the environments in which they're operating aren't necessarily conducive to women getting ahead, right? So no wonder the burnout rate is higher. Alyssa, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I hear that comment, and I think I've had anecdotal conversations where women are just ready to walk away because they want to do their own thing, because their own thing means they get to do it their way, they get to build it the way they want it, they get it to make it work for their life. And I've said, business was built by men, and primarily white men 100 years ago. The whole modern day way we work. I think we've seen in the last few years, a lot of those barriers are breaking down, or the changes that are happening, the remote work and everything we've gone through in the pandemic. If we could just tear it all down and men and women come together and build it the way we want it, with all of us having input, I think business would look a little bit different than it does today. But we joined in a little bit late to the game, and the structure was built, and we're trying to modify and change it because we want to be here. and women want to be here. And it's just figuring out what's this infrastructure that works for everybody to get ahead. And that's men, women, underrepresented groups, everybody kind of included. So hopefully that helps, Joe.
Well, it's fair to say we can always find something in the internet that supports whatever opinion we want to protect. So that goes without saying. A question that I have is, you cite the McKinsey study, you showed the list of the companies you're working with, but Alyssa, as you know, so many of our members, we're the small, mid-sized business. We're, 5 million to 100 million is kind of the median range. In big companies, you've got hundreds and thousands of employees and the opportunity to identify talent and pull talent through. In a company with 25 or 75 or 150 employees, how does this work? How does this play?
Well, it's kind of easy to answer since we are one of those organizations, and we're a little different because we're a nonprofit and obviously we're focused on women. But when we started thinking about diversity at our organization, we realized we really didn't have a lot of practices in place to identify talent that was diverse. And so we rely honestly on people we know. But when we started posting jobs, we realized that if we would do boosts, even in the posting of jobs, to make sure that our job postings went directly to underrepresented talent, that automatically changed the pool of candidates that we received to interview for our jobs. And so I think even a smaller mid-sized company can really think about the recruiting process and how you find that talent. And sometimes you have to pay a little bit more, you have to do things a little bit differently in order to uncover that talent, and maybe think about a different geographic area. So there's a lot of things, I think, especially in the recruiting piece, if you're looking at just diversity in your organization, maybe you need some extra support or help from an agency that specializes in that. So you reach out to that group. I mean, you can do the training, I think, internally. There's a lot of different ways to bring this message into your company and to really think about what is the culture we want to create. Do we value diversity? How do we create a culture that showcases that? And how do employees know that this is important to us? And so again, the training, I think, really does add value. And I realize everybody doesn't have 25 people in human resources that can go out and create specialized custom programs. So thinking about off the shelf, Amy probably has some other.
Yeah, I was just going to say, but even if you don't have those resources, you do have things that we've put into place, right? So limit referral hiring. Alyssa said, like in the beginning, we used to count on referrals a lot. You tend to refer people who you've worked with or who look like you or who you get along with and you have some common. Limit referral hiring. You also want to make sure you can find apps on the computer right now that will screen your job descriptions for certain words that are off-putting to either women or people of color. Right. So there are sometimes you just want to do a screen of your job description before you post it. And then lastly, a lot of companies, even small companies, have started adopting blind resumes. They screen the name right off of the resume. They screen out any pronouns and then really take a first stab at evaluating the resume just based on the descriptors.
Okay, so I'm a CEO of my company, and Alyssa, you work with all these folks. How do I present a program? How do I create a culture that is not just inclusive, but it's attracting to women? And the counter to that is, as a female looking at a job, what are some of the warning signs, or what are some of the positive indications that they would look at and say, hey, this is a place I want to be a part of, or I'm going to stay away from this?
Well, that is a whole separate
loaded
webinar,
question.
I will give some high level things that I think are important. And Amy, jump in. First off, I would say, and what we say to women all the time is look at the leadership. Make sure that you talk to people in leadership before taking one of those roles. Make sure that when you're, as a company, talking to talent, that you are giving them access to women leaders, underrepresented leaders, whoever it is, or if you're not one of those, that you're able to articulate why it's important that your organization has them in the mix. And I think transparency and being able to articulate that goes a huge a long way, I guess, for making your organization attractive to those underrepresented groups. I would say, I mean, Amy, do you have another?
No, I just wanted to share a story which doesn't come from the corporate world, but comes from the business school world. But we work with several MBA programs, and an MBA program was recently hiring a chief diversity officer. And when one of the candidates met with the committee was all older white men. What kind of commitment will that chief diversity officer receive if they couldn't even put together a committee that was reflective of the population that person is trying to serve, right? So what did that person do? They posted an article on LinkedIn. Remember that in today's day and age, people can always report out when they're disappointed. So make sure that doesn't happen. Like Alyssa said, put people in front of people when you're recruiting that look like them. Maybe if you do know someone had a very positive experience, ask them to post something about it on Glassdoor. There's always opportunities to get your messages out there.
And Joe, just quickly on culture, I think culture is about the transparency and the conversation and just giving people the space to be honest about their experience and to be responsive to what you hear. And I think sometimes that's easy to create an organization, sometimes it isn't, but I think thinking about that and what you want your organization to, how you want your organization to reflect externally is really important, and internally too, to your employees.
Oh, great, thank you so much. Last question. You had mentioned we've seen progress, right? But A, does this ever end and we get to a place where and B, what's going to happen when will we see progress? What will be some of the things we'll see besides the data that there's real progress on this?
Joe, can you repeat the first part of your question? You cut out a little bit there.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm just looking ahead and saying, you talked about progress and progress going forward. Will there be an end where this ceases to be an issue? But more importantly, what will be some of the signs of progress that we'll see beyond just the data that you guys cited earlier?
Yeah, but I don't want to say just beyond the data, because those are key indicators, right? When we see the pay gap at 0, I think that's going to be a really strong indicator. When we see the number of CEOs in the Fortune 500, reach 50%. But it's a good question, Joe, because you're asking what else. We're going to see more. We're going to see, how do I say this? We're going to see more unanimity. I always say that word wrong, unanimity around people's behaviors in the workplace. What do I mean by that? Men are going to be taking more paternity leave, right? And not shy away from it because it doesn't reflect well upon them. People are going to have more flexible work schedules. Alyssa was just sharing with me earlier today that a lot of our large consulting companies are paying for daycare to travel, nannies to travel, right, with their employees who have to travel. So I think what we're going to see is that's going to be extended to men and women equally. So Alyssa, what are your thoughts?
No, I think it's a good point and that you made, and I think there's always something, again, depending on where you are, small to medium-sized business to very large companies, there's a range of things that you can do, and I think that we will start seeing improvement. We've seen huge improvement, like I said, in our MBA enrollments, and I think that we are also, with all of the shifting and changing workplace, the pandemic is going to do both good and bad. And I think it's shown that there's a lot of challenges that women still face, even working from home, in terms of childcare when there is no childcare available. But then there is also, this opportunity to have this more flexible work. And I think that leveling of the playing field will contribute to all boats rising.
Well, Alyssa and Amy, thank you so much for sharing your insights. To our attendees, we'll be sending a link to today's recording and slides in about 24 hours from now. You can find more information and register for upcoming webinars at vistage.com/webinar. That's vistage.com/webinar. Please also plan to join us for our next virtual national conference, The CEO's Journey, People and Culture, on March 25th. More information is available at vistage.com/peopleculture. For our Vistage members, join us for a conversation with Indra Nui on Friday, April 1st. former CEO and chairman of PepsiCo, Indra will share insights in this Vistage exclusive conversation on lessons she has learned about leadership from her notable career. Register online at My Vistage or through the app. Again, Alyssa and Amy, thank you so much. We really appreciate what you have to share. Our community is so open to your ideas. And thanks everyone for attending today. Please stay safe and be well.